Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the AP poll, did a little bit of a reaction, some very interesting stats that come out of that might inform some of your futures that you place here pretty soon. But at the end of the day, let's get into all of the other stuff that happened throughout this week. We obviously were just enamored with making predictions this week, so we got a little bit lost in the sauce, but let's jump into this and let's start and let's talk about what just happened with Michigan. Michigan just got their punishment down from the NCAA with all of the sign stealing scandal. We can officially close the book on the Connor Stallion saga, and as a lot of people assumed, it was a slap on the wrist. It wasn't necessarily this super aggressive, coming down with a hammer that some people thought they might get. The reality was the NCAA was never going to be able to do that, nor would they do that even if they could to a team like Michigan. But that's a totally different conversation for a different time. It sounds like they're going to get a very significant fine, around a $20 million fine, something that they can handle. I can almost promise you that. Now, the bigger thing here is they lose all the postseason football revenue that they would get over the next 2 seasons. So let's say Michigan makes the CFP this year, or let's say they make it next year and they make a bowl game this year. They get none of the money that they would make from that. That is not a huge deal, but definitely something that can affect them going forward. They're obviously going to have to pay quite a bit right up front. Michigan has the money. They're not going to be, absolutely dying because they had to pay $20 million to the NCAA. What they could have to do is be a little bit more economical when it comes to the next recruiting class, and then hopefully by 2027, 2028, they're fully back on track. But maybe it's a little bit of a blip. Anything other than that, I really don't expect from this fine. The other thing is Sherrone Moore was given a additional game suspension. It sounds like that's going to be served in 2026, so he likely will not miss week 1. He already is missing week 3 and week 4 because he really wanted to coach against Oklahoma, his former team, which I totally understand, but he likely will not get that the additional ban until 2026, where he'll probably miss the first week of the season. But week 4 and week 3 this season, he will absolutely miss against, I can't remember who week 3 is. I know week 4 is at Nebraska, so that's an absolutely huge one that he's missing, but that was a decision that he was willing to make to be able to coach in Norman for one time. But it is a relative slap on the wrist. There's some other things in here, Connor Stallions has an 8-year show cause, I believe. I tend to believe he should be, eliminated from the sport, but that's a totally different conversation. Jim Harbaugh has a show cause. Again, doesn't matter. He's never going to come back to college football. Did I say Sherrone Moore? Jim Harbaugh has a show cause. Doesn't matter for him. He's not coming back to college football. For Sherrone Moore, he does have a 2-year show cause. It'll be interesting. I don't think it'll be a huge deal by any means. Show causes have always been something that doesn't really matter at the end of the day. There's obviously some things that could come out during that would be very interesting, but as of right now, it doesn't seem like a huge deal for this program. There are some additional things in there, some little things thrown in there, a little bit more of a fine on specific things. The reality is it was a slap on the wrist. Like many people expected, they weren't going to give him a real postseason ban. They weren't going to, vacate a title in any way, and I don't think it does anything anyway. I think we all saw Michigan lift the trophy. We all know that Michigan won the national championship that year. So I didn't think there was a lot of utility in taking away a title. I think a postseason ban could have been handed down. It probably wasn't going to be for a number of reasons, including because they're Michigan, but at the end of the day, a relative slap on the wrist for this. The one thing I'm a little bit upset about is the Connor Stallions of it all. I tend to believe he should be no longer allowed to be in college football, but that's a personal choice. That's a personal opinion, so I won't necessarily say they're totally wrong for how they've handled this. It'll be interesting to watch this develop. There's no doubt about that. Obviously, something that could impact Sherrone Moore's future here, depending on how intense a lot of this stuff becomes, how much stuff comes out with the show cause. But the reality is, it's a slap on the wrist. As long as Michigan can put together a solid season this year, keep Bryce Underwood on that team for 2026, they're going to be totally fine. So it's one of those things that I think all of us understood. It was going to be a relative slap on the wrist at the end of the day, but this officially kind of confirms that. Definitely some things in there that could affect them in the short term. I don't think anything that'll affect them really in the long term here. The John Mateer saga was a relatively short one, but a really weird one for a time. It popped up on X this past couple of days. It sounds like a certain nosy Texas fan got involved in John Mateer's Venmo transactions and had gone back all the way to 2022, I believe, when he was a freshman at Washington State. And there was a transaction that said sports gambling, parentheses, UCLA versus USC. They had played the day before. Obviously, people's ears perked up, and there was a lot of talk going around. Could he possibly be suspended for this year? Could there be a full-blown investigation? All that type of stuff. It doesn't sound like anything's going to happen here. I don't really think there's much of a story here. If I'm being totally honest, maybe he did end up betting. He said that he has not bet. He released a statement saying that he has never gambled on sports, that it was an inside joke between him and his friends. Not a great inside joke as far as I'm concerned, but at the end of the day, it doesn't seem like there's going to be much to this. I think he's going to be totally fine. No suspension, no craziness coming for John Mateer. I do think it's something that was just a little bit weird at the end of the day more than anything else. The bigger thing here is make those transactions private, especially if you're a public figure in any way. Do not have your Venmo transactions out for the open if you're really anyone, but especially if you're someone like John Mateer. But I don't think you're going to be able to prove any wrongdoing here. If you were to prove it, it would take an investigation that would cost a lot of money. I don't think they're willing to do that. So I think John Mateer is going to be totally fine. I know Texas fans might love to hear that he gets into a little trouble here, might be suspended for a game or two. He's not going to miss any time. He will be totally fine. This is a relative non-story and something that I think was just kind of a couple of Texas fans getting a little bit overzealous on the timeline this past week. The Arch Manning noise. I wanted to talk about this in a little bit more depth yesterday, but I figured I had a little bit of time here. Paul Feinbaum keeps writing checks that Arch Manning has to cash. And this one, I believe it was, he will be the most dynamic player of a generation. Before, it was the best thing, he's the best thing since Tim Tebow. What are we doing? I think Arch Manning is going to be really good. I think he's going to be an incredible player. I think he's going to be really good this year. I think he could be, incredible in 2026 when he does come back to Texas. He has incredible foundations when it comes to mechanic and work ethic. Obviously, he has a great knowledge of the sport coming from the family he comes from and being as inquisitive as he is as a person. He's incredibly humble, has never stepped out of line, has always said the right thing, been a great teammate, done the things that a lot of people claim they want this sport to be about. Arch Manning is about, and you would think that he is the worst person ever, the way that some people talk about him. Now, I get it. He's the starting quarterback for a team that not a lot of people like. I totally understand that. I also understand that he's a part of a team that has a chance to win a national title. So if you're an Ohio State fan, you're obviously not going to talk glowingly about Arch Manning. If you're an Oklahoma fan, an A&M fan, a Georgia fan, you're not going to talk glowingly about this kid. What I do want to say is, why are we setting him up for failure? Why are we putting him in a position where we are making expectations that we know are a little bit out of the realm of possibility? Now, it's not to say that he couldn't be an incredible player. It's just to saying he's the most dynamic player in a generation that includes Johnny Manziel and includes Cam Newton and includes Tim Tebow is remarkably dangerous for a kid that's about to make his third career start up there in Columbus in 2 weeks now. He's a great player. I think he's going to be an awesome player. We are setting him up for, if he makes one or two mistakes early on in that game against Ohio State, the avalanche of hate that will happen is going to be insane around this kid, and it will come from the same people that are singing his praises right now. I'm not necessarily saying Paul Feinbaum's going to totally change his tune. I'm not calling out Paul Feinbaum as an individual. I'm saying the whole entity around this guy, the talk around this guy, is just dangerous in some respects, because we're putting him on a pedestal that he has not necessarily earned yet, that he very well could earn, but we're putting it way too high. We're not allowing this kid to go out there, to play his game, to make a couple of mistakes, to not bury him while he's making those mistakes, and then let him become the player that he's going to be, which I think is going to be an incredible player. I think is going to be the number 1 overall pick in 2027. That's how good I think this kid is going to be, but let him play football first. Let him do anything first. Let him play a real meaningful football first. Obviously, you played a little bit last year, and you did some incredible things during those games. You also made some big-time mistakes during those games. Let this guy develop, and it feels like they know what they're doing. That's the frustrating part to me. You hype him up to a level that you know he can't meet in his very first year starting. He doesn't meet those crazy expectations that are almost unattainable. You bury him way too early, and then you repeat. And he possibly turns a corner in 2026 and plays incredible football. All of this to say, I know that was a little bit of a rant, but all of this to say, I think he's going to be a great player. I think he's going to do incredible things at Texas. I think he could win a national title, win a Heisman, be the number one overall pick in 2027. I think he can do all of that stuff. Let him take the time to do it all. Let him do all of that stuff at the pace that we've let a number of other people do it at. He is going to be a good player. People are writing checks that he might not be able to cash this year, and he might not need to cash for Texas to be a national title contender. So I think he's going to be a great player. I love Arch Manning. I think he's done an incredible job throughout his career. He is someone that we should look at every single time we talk about college football being broken. We should look at guys like Arch Manning and say, it's not all the way broken, because he is someone that could have transferred for as much money as you can possibly think of right now. He didn't. He decided to sit behind Quinn Ewers for 2 years, even though everyone was telling him that he was more talented than him. He took his licks, did his work, and now it's his chance to shine. Just let him shine before we start doing all this talk. That's all I ask. I think he's going to be an incredible player, but I also think, in part, I think Paul Feinbaum is doing a little bit too much a little too early. He very well could do it midway through the season. As of right now, just let that guy go out and play football, and then we'll make some opinions about what's happening over there in Austin then. Kansas got a crazy donation this past offseason, or actually very recently, from David Booth, the founder of Dimensional Fund Advertisers, also a Lawrence native. Very, very rich guy, has donated $300 million to the athletic program. I tend to believe this is a direct response to Texas Tech. I think they see what's happening down there with Cody Campbell, and this own rich guy up there in Kansas said, all right, fine, I'll go dollar for dollar with you. And that'll be an interesting thing to watch. Obviously, this is for the entire athletic department, so a lot of it's going to go to basketball. Let's just be totally honest. That's what Kansas is. But it does give you the ability to attack in both sports. Be very, very relevant in basketball the way that you want to, while also getting into a little bit better of a place in the football field. So it'll be a really interesting thing to watch. You know, it is directly to the school, so that makes it a little bit more complicated in terms of how you spend that money, how you use it, and how you make it look like NIL money, which is a conversation for another time. But at the end of the day, it's a huge donation to a program that very much needs it. As of right now, it feels like a lot of teams are kind of leaving them in the dust when it comes to the NIL world. They need a little bit of help, and David Booth said, yeah, fine, you can have $300 million. So a huge thing for Kansas, and something that could be hugely impactful for them. John Gruden has talked about possibly coaching in the SEC. He was down in Athens, I believe, early last week, and he was talking about he would, quote-unquote, die to coach in the SEC. This is a very, very good football coach. Obviously had a less than ideal exit to the NFL for a number of different reasons, but he is someone that he knows football. There's no two ways about that. One of the better offensive minds that you're going to find on planet Earth right about now, and he absolutely is someone that I think would do great things in the SEC. He's been around the SEC at different times throughout his career, but not as a head coach, and I think that Arkansas job could come open, and that would be a really interesting one. Florida maybe could come open, and that would be an interesting one. There's a number of jobs in the SEC that I think you would look at. John Gruden at Auburn could be pretty special. I'll just be totally honest, but we'll get into all of that in time. This is just something to watch for the time being. If someone gets fired in the SEC this year, you can bet John Gruden might just have his agent make that call pretty quickly. But that'll be something to watch, no doubt about it. The team that he was tied to before in the SEC was Tennessee, and I actually forgot to put a slide in there, so apologies for that. But Tennessee did sign with Adidas this past week. It is a substantial deal. It sounds like they're going to make about $20 million annually from this deal. Adidas is probably going to lose a little bit of money on this, but at the end of the day, it is a huge thing for Adidas, a very interesting thing for Tennessee. The fans are not super happy for a number of different reasons, and I think the bigger one is they had Adidas jerseys in the past, and they weren't quite as good. Just respectfully to Adidas, I do think Nike has a little bit more clean jerseys, a little bit more clean apparel. Also, the fans want to be wearing the same apparel that the team is wearing. That will obviously change in 2026. But regardless, I promise you, once they start using that money to buy a better roster so they can be a better title contender, the fans will be totally fine. So I think this thing will work itself out. I think Adidas is a more than fine company to sign with if you're Tennessee, but going to be incredible to watch all of this unfold. Obviously, it was a week that was filled with predictions from me. I had to get through all of the conferences before we kicked this thing off, but wanted to get to the Michigan punishment. Obviously, a relative slap on the wrist. Wanted to talk about John Mateer because it's one of the more ridiculous stories that we've talked about, and had to get an Arch Manning rant out just really quickly, but that'll do it for this edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please do like, subscribe, comment, do all of that good stuff. Really does help what I do over here. A lot going to happen on Monday. I'm going to drop my I'm going to drop my playoff predictions. I'm going to give you my Heisman winner, a number of other postseason awards. Definitely do my top 25, give you my top 10 group of 5 teams to possibly make the playoff. A number of things coming on Monday. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you then.